Well, hello there, and welcome to TSG Live Talking Trains.
Hi, everyone.
This is Murph.
I am. And this is John.
Hi. I'm the guy you always see on this channel, unfortunately, for you. And we're here once again, coming to you this time from Boulder Creek. And that's the place where he lives. And Murph couldn't come down to the TSG Intergalactic headquarters today, so I came up here and we've been hanging out today. So,
yeah, my wife is out of town and my dog can't stand being alone. And he's a couch potato, but here we are up on a couch and the dog will not come up this way.
Yep, no dogs.
But he seems happy, so it's all good.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about a few things here today. We're going to have Sparky 107 on. You know him from YouTube. Talking about his YouTube meet and greet that he does every year. And then we're also going to be talking to Rod Jensen, who is working on O-Scale West, which is a big event happening this weekend here in the Bay Area. And then we're going to be talking to Paul Hobbs, all the way from New Zealand. So, but don't tell him he sounds Australian. So those are fighting. those are fighting words down under, yeah. Right? So anyway, why don't we get on with this? And we're going to bring Dave Sparky on first. Hey, there he is. Hi, Sparky Dave. How are you doing?
Hey, Sparky. Good day, model railroaders.
Good day, model railroader. So we want to talk about the YouTube meet and greet that sadly I don't think I'll be able to come to this year because it's just too far and too expensive to travel that far.
Okay. Well, this year we're going to have it in Canada, so it's going to be a bit of a trip for quite a few people, I think. So everybody's got to get their passports in order, that's for sure. So.
Yeah. So what are you going to be doing up there in Canada? Eh?
Well, I modeled my layout off of St. Thomas, Ontario, so I'm going to start our YouTube meet and greet at that museum, in that yard, and at that station with a guided tour of all that.
Cool.
And that's just going to be fantastic if you ask me, because people can hang out here at my layout, and when we do that part of the meet and greet, they get to see the station modeled on my layout and the real thing. So I think I'm just speechless about that part. So
you sound like you're a little touched there.
It's well, I grew up in St. Thomas, so to actually bring the meet and greet up here to Canada and the Ontario area. Yeah. It's pretty special. I didn't think we had this much trains and preservations, museums, and stuff to do until I really got looking around, and a few people looked into it. And there's more than 3 days worth that we could do. So
excellent. Well, that's what you need, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
For sure.
So yeah, I was thinking about starting up a GoFundMe so I could get up there, but I don't.
Well, we should see what the chat says about that. Maybe they'll start throwing some YouTube funds at your way or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not good at begging, so we'll.
I'll beg for you because you did make it to my the Colorado meet and greet that I did. I think that was 2 years ago, right? So
yeah, something like that. About 2 years ago. That was a lot of fun too. So one of the great things about the YouTube meet and greets, and I'll mention this since I've been to one now, is that you get to meet all the people that you know from YouTube. And at least in our case, we had met before that, Dave, but it's really cool to meet people that you only know from social media because you find out that they're exactly who you think they are. At least that's been my experience with everyone that I've ever met from online. And it's kind of cool because
it's kind of the thing with YouTube too, is when I started it, I posted a video of me making a tree.
Yep, I remember.
The only reason why I posted that video is so I could see it again to remember how I made the tree. And then I had people comment on it, and I'm like, other people can see this? Oh my God. Like, what? And it just, my channel developed to the point where, because of the interaction with other people, fine, it's on YouTube, but they're still faceless. So I started doing the meet and greets down in Pennsylvania area for the most part, in Colorado, Reading, and stuff like that, just to put faces to names. And we're all in this for the trains, models, preservations, all that kind of stuff. So it's great to get the people together for a whole weekend. And it's kind of like a holiday is how I started it, right? So
yeah, well, I mean, it is a holiday, isn't it? Normally your yearly vacation, you go out and do stuff and tell people where you're going to be. So
it was supposed to be last weekend, actually.
Well, gives us more time to beg for
I haven't seen any super chats come up yet, so
Yeah, don't expect it. Besides, YouTube takes half of that anyway.
yeah,
We'd
Better
have
to
to
do-
raise. Yeah,
better
we'd
to
have
do the PayPal thing, I guess. So
right. We'd have to raise a whole lot on YouTube. We'll put it that way.
yeah, but this year's the first day of the meet and greet is going to be Friday at 4:00, and we're going to meet on Ontario Southland Railway. And there's a guy by Larry Broadbent that's going to kind of host a shop tour for us.
Nice.
This guy's worked for Conrail in the St. Thomas Yard. He's worked for the railroads probably 50 years. Locomotive shops, car shops, London Port Stanley Railroad. He's into. The guy's just a fountain of information. I can't wait to actually just talk his ear off for sure. Then go to OVR after that. It's a model train store.
Yeah, go see Lauren.
Yeah. And then, like I said, the Saturday will be St. Thomas. Then we're going to, by 2:30, head over to Waterloo Central Railway. Go on a coach car for an hour and 20-minute ride, I think. Then we get another shop tour there. And then top it all off at 5:30, a dining car that I've got set up that's actually going to be on a 2-hour trip behind a moving train. Like, come on. So
Nice.
I've done a dining car experience before at Steamtown. It sold out really quickly. I think back then it was $75 a plate. This one's $140, but that gives you the whole day's event from 2:30 on to 7:30. So everything's paid for the $140. But it's a moving train, and you get like it's a chef doing a 3-course meal. Like it's going to be the best of the best, like fine dining extraordinaire. So.
Well, this might be a strange question, but you're having it in Canada. So is it 140 Canadian or 140 US?
It's
Is it-
140 Canadian, so it's
Yeah, so what is
quite
that?
it'll be about what $105 American for you guys. So
Yeah, I'm thinking about $100 right in that range. Yeah.
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 but it's a moving train.
No. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying that I didn't know what the exchange rate is right now. So
Yeah. No, nowadays in my area, like you go out to fine dining restaurant, take your wife out for a good meal and stuff like that, you're looking at $200-300 anyway. So
yeah. Wow, I really want to come now because you could take me out.
yeah, well there you go.
If you spend that kind of money, that's a dinner I want to have.
Yeah, well it's going to be good. I've already seen the menu, and you get your choice of a couple things. So
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
sounds good.
I can't wait for that part. So, and then the Sunday we're going to meet at Mini Prince, his little warehouse factory area. We're going to start there. We're going to go and see the Canadian, which is the passenger train that goes from Toronto to Vancouver. We're going to go to Little Canada, which is miniature wonderland, basically, of all of Canada.
Oh, Canadian style. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's a train layout that takes you from one coast to the other coast. They're working on a couple other parts, but I've been there twice before, and I can't wait to go back. It's always changing. You're always going to see something different. So
That's cool.
Yeah. Sounds
then
like
to
a
finish
lot of
that one off, we're going to hit another museum in the Toronto area, but we're getting behind the scenes look at some roundhouse stuff. It's right underneath the CN Tower in Toronto. And they've got about 4 bays of this roundhouse that are not open to the public. And
Oh, nice.
that's what we're trying to get open to our group. So
some behind the scenes stuff.
yeah, stuff that nobody ever sees. So
Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah, but
Wow.
that's the meet and greet and the hand basket right there. So
Yeah. Well, now you've done a video on your channel. I've seen our top secret producer posting links to it. So if anybody wants more information, I'm sure they can find it there, right?
yeah, I think I just posted the video. Hopefully that's the one.
It comes up as your favorite cat videos. You know?
It might be. Who knows? Don't click it now. Wait until the end of the show.
Yeah. Don't click off this channel.
Yeah,
All
everybody
right,
be
well,
clicking it now. So
yeah, exactly. Especially since they think it's going to be cat videos, because you know how popular those are.
yeah, I tried a cat video. I got like 20 views on it, so I took it down.
Well, that's more than most of your streams.
Wow.
Oh man, I shouldn't talk.
I'll
So
hold
one
him while
question
you
I got-
hit him, Sparky.
What's that, Murph?
I said I'll hold him while you hit him.
Yeah. He's pretty slow. I've already got his wallet once, so
I was going to say he already stole my wallet, so it ran off with it.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
one question I got for you, John, is like the meet and greet you did go to. Can you pinpoint like one favorite point in it? It was 3-day event, like most of my
Uh-huh.
YouTube meet and greets. So
Yes, I can absolutely pinpoint my favorite part about it was the people. It was the people. I mean, these are people that in some cases that I've known for years, but hadn't met. Like, getting to meet Heath. That was great. He was
all the way from New York.
right. He was exactly who I expected him to be,
Yeah.
and we had a great time hanging out, BSing, how
Yeah.
it is. We get together and it's cutting each other down the whole time, which is fun, which is a lot of fun. Like talking about how small the stream is,
That's pretty true of most train conventions. And if you ever look at what pictures from a train convention you actually like go back to and go, oh, that was fun, it's the pictures with people in it.
Yeah.
And you can't understate how important people are in these instances.
Yeah. What I like about it too, and I'm gonna say this, is it's what I've heard people say about train events, really most hobby events, which is the hobby part of it. In this case, the trains and the railroad and history and all that is a great topic. There's no question about that. And it's a great excuse to go, but you'll always go back because of the friends you make.
Yeah.
And, that's true. And that's one reason why I would really, really like to be able to get out to this one this year, because I'll get to see Bernard. He was at the meet and greet last time. Really like hanging out with him. He's just a super guy to be around. Don't let this go to your head, Dave. You're a great guy to be around. It's just a lot of fun to hang out and just BS, and that's really the highlight for me.
Yeah, it is the main reason why I do the meet and greets. And like, I can take a holiday anytime, keep it to myself. It could be train related or anything.
Yep.
But the people do make the event awesome.
Yep.
And I've had people from Germany come to the meet and greet that I had at Steamtown. Like you said, Heath from New York went to Colorado.
Yep.
Again, Bernard was at the one last year at Reading. And just because it's a 3-day event doesn't mean you have to book 3 days, come up, do the 3-day event and go home. Make a holiday out of it. There is so much stuff to do in my area, like the CN Tower and things that are not train related, or
Sure.
things that are train related. Bring your family with you. There's so much more to do than just the 3 days. So,
Yep.
but yeah, it's definitely for the people, and that's why I keep doing them every year and trying to get them hosted and set up. And I try to give at least 6 months notice, so if people do have to get passports and stuff like that, it gives you lots of time. It usually only takes about 2 months to get a passport. So
yeah. Well, sir, more power to you to keep doing them. I think that's a great thing that you're doing, and it is a way to build community. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming on the show to talk about it.
no problem. Thanks for having me. It was great.
You're very
As you
welcome.
can see, I get a little excited about them. So
Yeah. And if you want to do this again next month, I know there's like still 2 months for people. So maybe we can do it again sometime before it happens. And
yeah, I don't think we ever did say the date. It's in August 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. So
oh, well, I'm glad you thought of saying that, because it completely escaped me. So we have June, July, and I got to look. I don't know when Talking Trains Live is going to happen in August, but we may even be able to come on and talk about it then. Who knows? Maybe by then that GoFundMe will be all funded, and I'll be telling people come ride and train with me.
Hey, Dave Hammer's in the chat. Maybe he'll set up a GoFundMe to get you here.
Yeah, there you go.
And he'll come too. So
that's right. We'll go fund me, and we can add a little extra for you, Dave.
yeah, perfect.
All right, Dave.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, see you in the chat.
Care. All right, bye.
Bye.
See ya.
All right. So now I mentioned that we're going to also be talking to Rod Jensen, who's bringing up something that's happening this weekend. It's O Scale West, and I have conveniently added a link for O Scale West in the description of this video. So when you see Rod talking about it and get all excited about coming, you can click on the link, and I believe they have online registration. Now we're about to find out, though, because I'm going to bring Rod up right now. And there he is. Hi, Rod. How you
Hi,
doing?
John. Good to see you again. Let me cut that last statement off at the pass. The online registration has closed.
Oh, no.
If you'd like to register, well, we're less than 48 hours, John. So
I guess we are.
That's true.
yeah. I mean,
But luckily, there's in-person registration. So
correct, which starts at 9 a.m. on Friday.
yeah, I'm sure we're going to hear about that. Let's bring this presentation up and see what this is all about.
Yeah, so it's called O Scale West, but it also includes S scale and all scales of narrow gauge.
Right on.
Our convention is held this year. Normally, in the past 35 years, this has been going on. I've been attending since 1991.
Wow.
We're going to hold the meet at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. You can see the 49ers stadium there in the background. I checked this afternoon. Rooms are still available at our convention rate of $169, which is a deal for
It is.
a 4 or 5 star hotel. If you look in the center photo there, that's the escalator. The meet is at the top of that escalator, and to the right is the bar. You can see that, and that's the lobby of the hotel. And as you said earlier in the podcast, a lot of it is socializing. So,
yep,
that's a big part of our meeting people, friends, and family too. Right through those windows in the back, great pool. O Scale West, we think is a family event, and it's $50, and that's for you, your spouse or significant other, and children, yours or someone else's that are modelers under 18.
So we can just pick someone up on the street then and bring them.
Well, no, I said modelers. We're looking for people that have an interest in modeling.
They might be modelers.
Well, yeah, I guess. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. If they're riding the trolley outside there, I guess they
that's right. There might be some foamers on the light rail.
Yeah. So the website has been updated this morning, and I would recommend that you go to oscalewest.com, and everything is pretty much laid out. I'm showing you here the schedule of events tab, and then you can see the other tabs: clinics, contest, home layouts.
Nice.
So I think, John, we have some other slides that show some of the activities, clinics at O Scale West. And again, some of these, I like to tell people, good modeling is good modeling regardless of what scale you're in. Okay.
Sure.
And this one, the first one there I've got is Phil Edholm is going to present his Agnew Depot build. And this one has a personal connection to me because it was the folks that are inside that depot, California Central Model Railroad Club, was the group that took me in when I was 16 years old. I was turned away by other clubs because I didn't meet the age requirement. And they helped me get started. And that was 55 years ago. And I'll show. We have another photo that relates to this story, so it's kind of bittersweet. The UP gondola there, that was something that we're going to see in another slide. But that's Dick Harley. I mean, he wrote the book on I think PFE, and his presentation is going to be on Union Pacific freight equipment. And then the third one over there I've got is showing is Alan Loiseau, who owns Empire Track Works. And he's going to say something near and dear to my heart, which is if you can build 3 feet, you can build 300. And that's hand laying track.
Oh, boy.
That's that one I'm looking forward to myself because, John, you haven't been over here lately, but I'm really close to getting it running. I mean, it's been a challenge, so I'll have you guys over soon.
Cool.
And then, of course, we have a favorite model contest, and some really cool stuff comes out for that. And the attendees vote on that, and that's on Saturday. The winner is announced on Sunday.
Something I like about that, and we did a little segment about this on the podcast earlier this month, with Rod Miller, and he was saying that it's just a popular vote. It's not a contest like you're getting points or anything like that. It's just you bring your stuff, and whoever's at the show gets to vote with what their favorite one is. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to do it.
We encourage the builder to have a little description, because
Sure.
let me tell you, you can learn a lot from other modelers. Like I'm looking at that load right now, and how did that guy do that banding?
Yep.
Yeah. And here, a big part of O-Scale West is layout visits. And again, it's not all O-Scale. Matter of fact, the one in the top there, that is Jack Burgess. If you've never seen Jack Burgess's layout, it's I forget the date. It's August 24th, 1938. I mean, it is something else. The second one in the middle there, that's Matt Covington's. And then down below is the California Central. And I'm very proud of that Mission Bay Depot. That was built by me 55 years ago, and it still serves the Mission Bay yard. So
excellent. That's great.
We also have the S scalers. As I said, it's O and S and narrow gauge, and they'll have an operating layout at the meet. Yeah. And this one is new this year. This is included in your $50. We are going to have a guided tour of the Niles Canyon Brightside Shops and Yard. And that'll be at 2 o'clock on Friday. So if you're interested in this, it's still available. It's included in the $50, but you have to be registered. So go to the Hyatt on Friday morning and let them know you want to do this. I've got a map. Get an early start, because remember, this is the beginning of the Memorial Weekend. So technically, if Google tells you it's 30 minutes, I'd add another 30 for a Friday. But hopefully, we're going to beat the traffic. If you're
that's how traffic is always in the Bay Area, isn't it?
yeah, I guess so. And then, of course, we have a swap meet and manufacturers, and you can rent a table. I think we still have tables available. Tables are $50, but you don't have to rent a table. We have a white elephant sale, and if you just have a few things, put them in there, put a price on it, and away it'll go. I actually have 2 tables. I'm selling a little business that I used to run that I manufactured punched leaves, and I'm going to have the machine and inventory. So there's an opportunity for somebody even to have a little side business. Good way to write off your train conventions.
That's right, because they could pay the $50 and get a table, and it'll be a write-off on their business, and then they could go to the show anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. So something else, and we should mention this, I think, is that there's another event. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in Memorial Day weekend. And there's this one also, which is happening at Ardenwood, right? They're having rail fair. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, a whole bunch of people that I know are going to be there, because I forget what they call it now. It's the CCC for short. That's the ON30 modelers. That Phil Edholm, who's doing a presentation at O-Scale West, is also part of that. And I see him every year at rail fair at Ardenwood.
Yeah, John, the thing here, if you look at the dates, we start on Friday, they start on Saturday, we finish on Sunday, and so I recommend, since we're starting first, you come to O-Scale West, and then maybe on Memorial Day, Monday, take in the rail fair up at Ardenwood. I take my grandkids to it just about every year. It's a great show. And
we go to rail fair just about every year as well, and we're going to be there. My plan is to be there on Monday, because I'm going to go talk to some friends from the Western Pacific, or I forget what it's like, the Feather River Historical Society or something like that. We're members of it, and we're members of everything. So,
well, I will see you there. But right now, I got to finish up the last minute things for O-Scale West. Go to our website, oscalewest.com. I think it'll answer all your questions. Great layout tours. I think I've got 7 of them on the agenda for Friday night. So you could roll from Brightside after the tour right in, and it'll be a great start of our convention. So looking forward to
Excellent.
seeing folks out at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara for O Scale West.
Thank you so much, Rod, for taking the
Take
time
care, Rod.
to come and talk to us about it today. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on Saturday at O Scale West.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rod.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Okay. So now we're just going to talk for the next 2 hours. Oh, okay.
No.
Maybe not.
I think we should let Paul into this.
Let's let Paul into this. We're having so much fun. It would be a shame not to let Paul all the way from down under come and talk to us about. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. Here is Paul. Let's remove that and look at Paul. Hi, Paul.
How are you?
I'm really good at this. Can you tell?
Always nice to be around an expert.
Yeah.
To be fair, everybody that writes software decides to rearrange where the buttons are because it's going to be better this time. So
Yeah. And
John's learning a new button layout.
yeah, they've changed things on the program that we use here. So no, actually, I meant to do that. I wanted to have more tension and more build up to introduce you.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So we're going to be talking about now the main feature of the program today, which is every 20 years things change. And I've been looking forward to this because I want to see if you talk about the things that I'm expecting you to talk about in the presentation. So why don't we bring it up and you can get right on with it.
So I have to push some buttons now?
This is where you can push the buttons
Your
to
turn.
it. Yep, you can advance the slides. Now, but you've only had to do this once, so it should be easy for you.
Sure.
Hey, Paul.
That title actually is supposed to fit in the box, but it moved a bit on the upload. So
Well, we're going to blame that on the program too.
Or we'll just
We'll do
say
that.
it's a topic too big to fit in a box.
I did notice that your name fit in the box, though. So
yes,
That's good. Okay.
yeah.
separate
So
box.
before you start talking about 20 years and all that, tell people about yourself. You're all the way from New Zealand, but we've had the opportunity to meet you, I think, twice now in person, maybe 3 times in person.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
So
come to North America quite regularly. So
yeah, that's why you have less of an accent. That's what it is.
yes, I've been coming to the United States since 1971. So
Very good.
Wow.
Well, we're always excited to see you and happy that you're able to make it all the way out from down under for this and for these events because, you know, like for me, it's hard for me even to get to the next state over because, you know, we get busy and things get to be expensive. So when someone's able to come from across the globe, it's always nice to have them there. So.
and it's interesting seeing different people's attitude to distance travel. Like people from New Zealand and Australia are quite used to the fact that you're on a plane for a long time. So
Sure.
20-hour trips, 25, 30-hour trips have been part of our, DNAs for ever since the jet airplane.
Right.
So whereas a lot of North American friends seem to think going coast to coast is a long trip.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's like me going to Toronto. That's just only, I think, a 5-hour jet flight. So it's nothing to you, but hey, you know.
Has Paul ever been to the Chicagoland area? Yes, he has, several times.
The guy's just a traveler. So let's talk about this every 20 years the railroad changes. What brought this on? And let's get into this because I think it's an interesting topic.
Well, I've been around clinic programs, like I was involved on the National Convention Clinic Committee for 6 years between 2005 and 2010, and got to see a lot of clinic titles in that time. Like your average national convention has something like 80, 90, 100 topics. And it's interesting to try and find a topic that's outside the box. And so that's what I try and do with new talks that I work up. And I actually started this one about 3 years ago, and it sort of sat there. And then back in February, I thought, why don't I finish this darn thing? And then I showed it to you in March, and you decided to invite me to give it a talk.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be good. Excellent.
Should we give it a shot?
Let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Push a button.
Hey, it worked.
It did.
That's because you're doing it, not me.
I searched the internet looking for something that kind of combined time and date. And the background there that I found is actually an amalgam of a calendar page and a clock. So it's kind of indicating that time flies, I guess. What I'm trying to talk about is 200 years of railroad history in 20-year chunks. And I'm going to get to some topics and do them reasonably well, and other things I won't even mention. So, there's a chance for you to go and do some research on your own to find out more about what you really find interesting. So, let's proceed. I use Wikipedia for a lot of this. I worked at a library for a number of years, and the librarians always turned their nose up the moment you mentioned that you used Wikipedia. For historic stuff, it's usually written by somebody who is a fan of the topic and knows a lot about it. Whereas if you're dealing with things like pop, icons and that sort of thing, you'll get a lot of rubbish that's written by people who either like them, don't like them, or something like that. And what I'd like you to learn today is something about contemporary railroads, things that go together. You can't have a 440 pulling a double stack train, for instance, because their eras are so far apart. So here's the first 20-year block from 1820 to 1840. And flanged wheels on metal rails had been around for a very long time because they'd figured out that hauling coal out of a mine or other types of extractive industries, the most efficient way to go was to have something like a horse or a cable pull a wagon, and the wagon is on a more firm ground than earth that'll either be too dry or too wet. And so a railway turned out to be a reliable year-round means of moving wagons, and the resistance of a wagon on a rail is far lower than it is on any other type of surface. And steam had been around for quite some time, like steam-powered riverboats came about just before the turn of the 18th or the 19th century. And you had large steam boilers doing things like pumping and running cables. And so the technology was there. It was a matter of making it work in a small space like a railway locomotive and be able to have some sustainability. Like once you get the water warm and use it up, you want to have more hot water to keep the steam coming. So George Stephenson in Britain was one of the people who came up with a working locomotive, and he proved that on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which initially was going to be horse-powered. And then a few years later, he came up with the rocket, which proved to be a reliable working everyday locomotive. So some things are proving a concept, other things are doing the job properly. And Tom Thumb in the United States, only 5 years later, demonstrated steam on the B&O. It was never going to be a everyday locomotive, but it proved the point. And so what was going to be a horse-drawn operation ended up being steam-powered. And I've actually talked about that whole subject, except for one minor point. On July the 4th, 1828, the groundbreaking ceremonies for two different transportation systems happened near Washington and Baltimore. One was attended by John Quincy Adams, who was president, and that was the first turning of the sod on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who lived in Maryland, he was at the turning of the first sod for the B&O Railway. Nobody knew what a railway could do at that point. Everybody knew what a canal could do. Mm-hmm. Well, both were going to go to Wheeling, Virginia. The railroad made it, and we'll find out when. And the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal basically went along the side of the Potomac River for quite some distance, but never got any further than a few miles in Maryland. You needed steam locomotives, and one of the good builders way back when was Norris Locomotive Works in Philadelphia. They built over 1,000 locomotives, or nearly 1,000 locomotives in that period, and even exported quite a bunch of them to Europe. And they also sent the first steam locomotives to South America. They, for some reason, closed in 1866, and Baldwin, who was already in Philadelphia, took over all of that kind of business. What was that question? Sorry, I missed it.
Was the B&O the first? Yeah.
No, it was the first one to do long distance. There were a lot of startups, like there was one down in North Carolina. There were others in the Boston area. So there were quite a lot of startups about the same time. But the B&O was the most ambitious project at that point. One of the really good designs that came from the United States was the 440. European, British, Japanese, and other railways were building railways between established points. So basically it was an improved transportation from this point to that point. The United States was building a whole country. So the object was to build it first, fix it, and make it better later. So they actually laid pretty rough track. So you needed a locomotive that could handle rough track. And the 440 design turned out to be the ideal candidate for that whole project, because it was a very flexible engine. And you could also have small drivers for freight, big drivers for fast passenger trains. So it was a very flexible design. We've moved up to the 1840s now. There's a lot of things were happening, but I just wanted to highlight a few things that were corrupt. You know, because the railway existed, you suddenly ended up with all these things happening. So, Railway Express. William Harnden lived in Boston, and he made regular trips on the railway between Boston and New York, carrying packages, monetary items, and things like that on a regular basis. And what he would do is take the train from Boston down to New Haven, took a boat to Long Island, the train down Long Island to get to New York, back again. He probably did this a couple of times a week. And it became a popular business. And that started the whole express game. And so that you ended up with baggage cars carrying express, which was consigned packages. And a lot of the banks that you see today got their start in the express business because they were handling valuables. Wells Fargo, major bank today. And American Express. That came about from the merger that happened during the USRA time of all the express companies. And after the World War I thing was over, they couldn't unmerge the express companies, so the railways took it all over and ran it until basically Amtrak.
I'm thinking that a lot of people wouldn't think of American Express, the credit card company, as getting their start in express packages or express freight or whatever. That's interesting.
Exactly. And they would take in things, particularly, say, Wells Fargo way back when, they were basically the bankers of the gold rush in California.
Yeah.
And so you would deposit the gold with them in California, and they'd transmit the information because the telegraph was around by then. And, somebody in Boston or Chicago or Pittsburgh would be able to take money out of the office at the other end. So the gold didn't move anywhere, but the transaction did. Another development was the telegraph. Railroads pretty soon realized that they needed to communicate with the station down the track, be it 5 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles. And the telegraph proved to be the ideal means of communication. So Western Union and the railroads basically grew up together. So that slide with the telegraph line right beside the track is exactly how both was useful to each other.
I think a lot of people don't think about the relationship of the telegraph to the amount of traffic they could put on the rails as well. But
exactly.
Yeah, that's another huge advancement, right?
Well, it overcame the tyranny of living by the timetable alone,
Yes.
and it was a railroad executive who started that whole thing
Yep.
because he was sitting there waiting for a train to arrive that never did. So he went into the telegraph office at the depot and says, "Can you ask the next station if the train we're supposed to meet has arrived there yet?" And the guy came back and said, "No." So he told the other, sent the message saying, "Hold that train at that point, and we're coming towards you."
Yep.
And that was the way it really got started.
The first train order, right?
I think his name was Minot,
That sounds familiar.
the same Minot of North Dakota.
Right.
He worked for James Hill for a long time. So the B&O kept plugging away. It took him 25 years to build this railway to get to Wheeling, Virginia. Now, why is Wheeling important? The first concepts of railways was a reliable land transportation between waterways. They knew what ships could do. They knew what riverboats could do. So by getting to Wheeling, Virginia, they're right beside the Ohio River, and that's navigable all the way down to New Orleans.
Aha.
And at Baltimore, you're navigable to the rest of the world. The only city that was benefiting from the hinterland up until this time was New York. New York had the Hudson River, Erie Canal, Great Lakes, and that's how New York got its really good start.
Huh.
But once you could get across the mountains, Baltimore got it, Philadelphia got it with the Pennsy, and Boston got it with the Boston and Albany. So each of those cities then benefited from the hinterland.
Huh.
1860 to 1880, the Civil War, all these other developments came along as a result. Now, what you're really getting is each pair of decades, some new invention comes along as a result of what's already been built. The Civil War, that was quite a disruption during the middle of the the 1800s. It was not the first railroad war. The first railroad war was in Crimea, where the Turks, British, and French were fighting the Russians. I never did pick up the reason, but I guess I could research that. But during the Civil War, the North was better connected by standard gauge railways. And there was a bit of a misnomer there. You could look at a map and say, this railway is coming from the east, this railway is coming from the west, arriving at this town. But the town itself resisted having the railroads connect with each other. And the local drays, horse, cart, was doing very good business, taking stuff from this railroad and delivering it to that railroad. And the local hotels were getting the passengers off this train, spending the night here. So it was actually an economic boost to that town. But the war caused a lot of the railroads to be joined up because the Federals needed it. And they turned around and said, "Ooh, we're still getting a lot of business. This connection didn't really disrupt the dray business. It's just the business grew exponentially as a result."
Uh-huh.
But the real demonstration was the first Bull Run or first Manassas, when General Beauregard is fighting the Federals and needs some help. So he sends a message to Stonewall Jackson, who had his army in the Shenandoah Valley. And so he put his army on the trains, took them over, and so you suddenly ended up with fresh troops. And that's how the Confederates won the first Bull Run. And with the Southerners all gone from Congress, Congress was able to get the Central line through Congress, and that was the beginnings of the Union Pacific and Central Pacific project, though they physically didn't get going until the war ended. And in 1864, they also authorized the Northern Pacific project, which was going from Duluth to somewhere on Puget Sound. 1864 was also when they decided to firm up the gauge, which the first enactment didn't do, and that's how we got standard gauge all across the country. A specific event, the Andrews Raid, April the 12th, 1862. This was a very daring adventure. What they did was they studied how the Western Atlantic Railway was running their passenger train, and they had this mixed train that started in Atlanta, stopped for breakfast at Big Shanty, and then continued on to Chattanooga. And so one day April the 12th, they stole the locomotive and the 3 boxcars at the front and headed off. If it wasn't for William Fuller, the conductor, being such a determined character, they probably would have gotten away with wrecking the railroad, taking out the communications, but he was sufficiently persistent, I guess, that he caught up with them, and they were caught. Some were executed, and there was never another raid like this. Now, to set this in with the rest of the Civil War, this was just a few days after Shiloh. So the Federals were already in Tennessee. They also set up a thing called the United States Military Railroad. It actually had authority to take over any railroad that they wanted, but they never bothered with the northern lines because they were all cooperating, the B&O, the Pennsylvania, etc. But every time they took over a southern railroad, the military railroad would take over ownership, repair what was broken, and get the thing running again. And President Lincoln was rather amazed at the amount of construction they could do in a very short time. And there were a couple of good rumors. A lot of work on that. Railway mail service. The railway carried mail from the very beginning. And in the latter part of the Civil War, there were a lot of troops in the hinterland and a lot of mail going to those troops. And so George Armstrong, who was the boss of the mail system at Chicago, thought, well, rather than just carry the mail and then dump it and need to sort it at the end, why don't we get it sorted in transit? And he set to, and the concept of sorting in transit was put together in 1864, and it worked. And so that was the railway mail service started.
Mm-hmm.
By 1907, there were 14,000 clerks. And then various things improved, like mechanized central sorting, and then the zip code, and the railway mail service basically went away in 1967. Though there was the last line to operate was between Washington and New York, and that ended in 1977. So Amtrak had some. And the Transcontinental Railroad,
Didn't realize it went on that long.
What, the railway mail service?
Yep.
Oh, yes. There is a place in Virginia, I forget the name of it, a branch line station, which is actually full of memorabilia about the railway mail service. And I got to visit that a couple of times.
Nice.
The Transcontinental Railroad, everybody thinks it suddenly happened, but it took them 4 years to get closer and closer and closer. So the stagecoach ride between one point and another got shorter and shorter. And so they knew what was going to happen when it all joined up. And everybody was waiting for this date, May the 10th, 1869. And I was there at the 150th anniversary just a few years ago.
We were there too. We probably saw you and didn't know who you were.
Yes. Which convention were you at? Because I was at the UPSP one.
I didn't go to a convention that week. We went into Salt Lake City and stayed with our friend Alvin. And then we went to the Stadler factory because they had an open house where they were building the new Caltrain stuff that's in service now.
Oh,
so I got to see the Caltrain electric, EMUs being built, and now I get to ride them, right? And I know that UP and SP historical societies were having a joint convention that year, weren't they, in Ogden?
Yeah, I went to the SP part of that. Yes.
Yeah. So, And then we went out to Promontory that day, and it was really an interesting experience. I found it to be more like a concert than a historical, you know what I mean? Like it had that feel of parking in a field, and then
and you really couldn't see much, but the fact that you were there within the atmosphere was quite something.
yeah.
I was on one of the flock of buses that were there. So
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, we drove in, and yeah, it was an interesting experience, and it was fun to be there. But it was
sure.
a lot different than what I was expecting. One thing I do want to mention that I love that you got right, and I wouldn't expect any different from you, Paul, which is that you named it Promontory and not Promontory Point, which so many people do. And Promontory Point is a place that's about 30 miles away from Promontory. So I always get a kick out of people that are being historic or trying to be historic, and they get something simple like that wrong. Kudos to you, my man.
Sometimes we succeed. But notice that this particular event led to so many others. Within 25 years, all these other railroads had completed their transcontinental railroads.
Yep.
And so it was a snowball effect.
I'm enjoying seeing this domino effect. I never really thought about that, but it makes sense. Once you figure out what something can do, of course, everything gets built on it, which leads to other advancements. So this is fascinating. Please continue, sir.
Right. Another important person was George Mortimer Pullman. He did not start his life as a railroader. His first thing was raising buildings in Chicago so that they could get above the mud and then pave the streets and all that. So that's where he made his initial money. And because he'd become wealthy, he decided he liked to travel, and he rode in these horrible sleeping cars, and he thought we could do better than that. So he borrowed a couple of coaches off the Chicago and Elton and developed his concept, and that worked. And so the car at the top left is the Pioneer, the first car he built from scratch. Well, he got a car builder to build it because he didn't have any plant himself at that point. And this happened to be just at the time when Lincoln was assassinated. And so when the train came from Washington through Chicago, he offered the sleeping car to Mrs. Lincoln to go down to Springfield. And they had to check the clearances because it was a fairly big car. They had to check the clearances on the whole line to make sure it would fit, which actually probably benefited the whole railroad system because it developed the kind of scale of size of equipment that we have today. One of the problems the British have is their clearances are so much smaller because they were the first. And, build a tunnel for a train and you can't make it any larger. So as soon as he did all this, and of course, the Transcontinental Railroad was coming along, Union Pacific contracted with Pullman to run his hotel cars. The Central Pacific decided to do their own thing, so I guess at Ogden you would change from one car to another. But eventually they fell into line as well, and Pullman eventually became the world's biggest hotel with 9,000 odd cars, 27 sleeping people per night, per car, add it all up. My math isn't that good. But this business kind of went away once the interstate highways came along, the jet airplanes, and they all took away the first class business. Coach business held up quite well, but the sleeping car business had gone away. Refrigerator cars. I won't talk much about rolling stock, but refrigerator cars, they worked on this concept for quite a while. And eventually in about the 1870s, they got the whole thing to work. And what a refrigerator car did was allow both meat, which is one style of car, and fruit and vegetables, which is another style of car, to actually travel long distance with these perishable products. In the meat business, you could locate the processing plants closer to where the animals grow rather than transporting livestock. And transporting livestock is no fun.
They also had to stop every now and then to make sure that the animals got water and food, right? So
yes, every day. I think it was every 28 hours,
Yep.
They had to stop the train, take the animals off,
Yep.
water them, feed them, rest them, and then put them back on the train. So yes, that was that delay as well.
It's easier to transport them if they don't have any needs, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fruit and vegetables, in my earliest times coming to PCR conventions, there was a fellow named Alan Fenton who lived in the Monterey area. He was one of the G&D operators way back when, and he worked for the Jolly Green Giant. And his attending a convention depended on the broccoli crop.
Uh-huh.
If they're picking broccoli, he was working. If they weren't picking broccoli, he came to the convention. So all of the seasonal stuff happens at different times of the year. And so the Bangor and Aroostook, potato country, is an entirely different season to growing vegetables in California. So they had reefers that were the same style as Pacific Fruit Express. And so at the busy time in California, the Bangor and Aroostook cars came west. And then at the other times of the year, they'd borrow some PFE cars. And so it was a lot of cooperation went on between the different crops and processors. We're up to 1880 now. This pair of decades was really more of improvement and a lot of growth. See how the railroads grew by another 100,000 miles in this 20-year period?
That's a lot of trackage.
Exactly. Now, these are two totally different developments, but they happened at the same time, and they kind of improved at the same time and got standardized at the same time. So think what we would have today if we didn't have the JD coupler and the Westinghouse air brake. And all those were invented, developed, improved, and over time became standard. And if you notice that coupler there, it actually has a slot in the knuckle, so you can actually take in a Lincoln pin coupler. The railroads were the first people to standardize time. Most communities worked on something called sun time. When the sun is right overhead, it's noon. And so 20 miles down the road, it's noon there, but it's 6 minutes different to where it is here. And while you're in your community and I'm in mine, it doesn't matter. But when you're starting to run an operation that's hundreds of miles long, you want to be able to, one, know what you're talking about with our railroad time, which is what the term, where the term came from, because railroad might be saying it's 12:15 in local time with the sun, might only be 12 o'clock. Well, the railroad is working to their time. And as people got used to dealing with the railroad, they got used to dealing with their time. It all got standardized in 1883. So you got the 4 time zones in the US and 6 time zones in Canada. This was not government driven until 1918.
Mm-hmm.
And then they introduced daylight time as well, which cows don't understand daylight time, so they still want to be built at the normal time of day. Now, the southern railroads were mostly built 5 foot, 5'6", and other gauges that wasn't the British 4 foot 8.5 gauge. And the way that southern railways originally worked was from the hinterland to a port. Everything's designed towards exporting primary crops, like cotton, tobacco, vegetables, things that they did for the Navy, etc. Turpentine, for instance. It wasn't connected within its own system, and it wasn't connected to the north. They traded with the north, but most of that's by riverboat and by steamship. So there wasn't this sort of need to bother about this gauge is here, that gauge is there. But once the war was over, a lot more trade was going on by rail between north and south. And the first way of overcoming this problem was to change gauge at a certain point You take this freight car, which has got standard gauge trucks, put 5 foot or 5'3" trucks under it, and carry on. So you had these places where there's yards and yards and yards of the trucks from the other side that get swapped out, and then time-consuming process. So what they did was they planned to change the whole of the Southern Railway system, 11,500 miles, in one Memorial Day weekend. That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
They only had to move one rail, but you got it done. They basically shut down the Southern Railways for a weekend and did the work. 1882, 1900, the last real thing was American Car and Foundry was formed by 13 car builders. You could build a wood freight car by having a carpenter and a blacksmith work together. This was the beginning of the steel freight car time. So all these smaller companies got together and developed one place at Berwick, which is where they made the investments, and started to make steel freight cars. And this was around 1900. And in 1904, they built the very first all-steel passenger car. So what they needed to do was to make the investment in one or two places for this different style of construction, which is a lot more capital intensive. 1900 to 1920, another era where a lot of things happen. You'll see a few of those in a moment. These two guys have nothing to do with railroads. They're merchant bankers.
Yes.
But the amount of financing that they did of the railroads at a time when they were buying new locomotives, improving the track, making things run faster, both of these people were very important to the funding of this whole activity. And there was a whole group of railroads that dealt with Morgan and a whole group of railroads that dealt with Kuhn Loeb and other merchant bankers. So they weren't the only games in town. Another was a merchant bank, I'm sure, was involved with this one, of 10 locomotive builders doing the same as what ACF did, and they called themselves ALCO by joining 10 locomotive builders together. And again, you were building the scale for a larger locomotive. All these companies built smaller engines, and now you're needing to build larger locomotives, so you need a larger facility. And so they based the real plant for ALCO was at Schenectady. Did I say that right?
Schenectady.
Thank you. Now, steel had been around for a very long time, but until the Bessemer process, it was always expensive. And so when the Bessemer process got into action, suddenly you had cheap steel. And so you could improve things like freight car trucks. An arch bar truck is full of bolts, which will get loose, need adjustment. A cast steel truck with an integrated bearing, there's nothing that's going to fall off. So it was...
Well, right. Theoretically.
Well, you know, compared to lots of bars and
right, of course.
Things, there's a lot less to fall off.
Yes.
And there was the Bettendorf was probably the best known of the cast steel trucks at that time. But the Andrews truck was designed to use all of the bearings that came off the arch bar trucks.
Oh.
So it was designed to take those bearings.
That's a smart idea.
Well, perfectly good, useful, expensive piece of brass, so why not?
Yeah.
Now, shipments in bulk. Another thing that steel did was got you away from long wooden center sills, long truss rods. You can't put a hopper in a truss rod car. You can't rearrange the strength points. So once you've got a steel car, you can have the center sill, which is strong, and the rest of it is sort of just floating on top of or supporting from that point. And you can put things like a hopper at the bottom. So you pour coal in the top of a coal car, and when you get to the destination, you open the door and it falls out the bottom.
Uh-huh.
It stops you putting sacks of coal in a boxcar, which is what you were doing before, and things in barrels and boxes. There was a lot less to carry if you moved it all in bulk. And if coal doesn't mind if it gets wet in transit. Gravel doesn't mind if it gets wet in transit. Sand does. Grain does.
Yeah, cement does.
Cement, etc.
Right.
So then you invent the covered hopper, so that pour the dry stuff in the top, shut the lid, get to destination, open the bottom, and again you're using gravity to move things in bulk.
Yeah.
You could also build proper steel tanks and put them on a car. So the whole style of wagon or freight car changed within this 20-year period.
Having stronger trucks also meant they could make longer cars that could carry more weight. I mean, there's a lot of things that the improvements in car technology brought. And
yes.
I think a lot of people don't realize, for example, that bulk grain used to be shipped in boxcars long ago, not in hoppers, right? Because hoppers didn't exist yet, really, not the kind we have now. So it's very interesting.
And you'd pour it into the thing with it. I saw a clinic just the other day on YouTube about grain doors.
Uh-huh.
And that was to keep the grain inside a boxcar.
Uh-huh.
So the USRA took over the railroads in December 1917 in World War I. They blamed the railroads for all the congestion that was happening at East Coast ports. But the problem was, you'd make something in the hinterland like Chicago or Pittsburgh or Cleveland, put it in a freight car, send it off to the East Coast, and the ship isn't ready to take the product, and they've filled the warehouses already, so the freight car sits there doing nothing, can't go back to get another load, and so all this congestion was blamed on the railroads, but it actually was everybody else. So the USRA took over managing the railroads. The railroads still operated, but they took out the competition. And with passenger trains, they says, this railroad will run this city pair, and that railroad will run that city pair. And so it was quite an interesting exercise for a while. And the railroads learned a few things like pooling and that sort of, as a result of all this. But there was also a shortage of rolling stock. So the USRA commissioned 100,000 freight cars. 25,000 of them looked like that one on the left. And they also had several designs of locomotives that were needed. And so 614 light 282s was among 1,870 locomotives. So there were a lot of benefits to the USRA's existence, but it was always a controversial exercise.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
We're up to 1920. I'm not going to stay and read all that. What do we got? 10 past 12. National passenger car fleet peaked at nearly 64,000 cars. Now, you might think this is widely distributed. In actual fact, 3 entities owned a third of that fleet.
That's a lot of cars.
The New York Central, the Pennsylvania, and Pullman owned 6, 12, and 9 is 21, right?
I think you're right.
21, that's a third of the 64,000. And we tend to forget the actual volume of trains that ran in the East. How many trains a day would there be between New York and Chicago? How many a day between New York and Boston? And we think that we're doing great with a couple of times a day going from Chicago to the West Coast. But every train to the West Coast, you needed 7 identical trains to provide daily service. So different sort of emphasis in different parts of the country.
It really adds up, though, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. And Pullman alone had 4,012 one-sleepers. That's 12 sections, 1 drawing room. And that was their most numerous, wasn't their most popular, but it was their most numerous car of the fleet. I stole this from another talk I do, and it's a table that came out of a book by John White. Put glasses on. Here we go. John H. White did this wonderful book about the American railroad passenger car, and had this whole table. So the peak was where I highlighted in red there. Superpower steam. The real peak of steam development happened in the 1920s, and basically it was led by Lima, and they came up with the large firebox, which needed the 4-axle truck at the back. But every improvement that you could have for a steam locomotive was incorporated in these locomotives. So you had the large firebox, you got a lot of heat, you got high pressure boiler, you had a feed water heater, so you weren't putting cold water into the boiler. It was always warm water. You had a superheater, which improved the steam, dried it out, and all these little things. And then roller bearings came along a few years later, and all these developments led to the best steam locomotives that were ever built. But hiding in the wings was our friend the diesel. This locomotive became the Berkshire's type because it was used over the Berkshires from Boston to Albany. And then people like the Nickel Plate, they bought a whole bunch of these things and became the fast freight line between Chicago and Buffalo. So, it had its place. And then you got the 484 from this. You got 210-4 freight locomotives, and of course some of the large articulators were very similar to these two. I didn't mention signals at all up until now. In 1927, the first CTC, Centralized Traffic Control, installation was on the New York Central. What that did was eliminate all these little towers in various places, and he could decide how a whole division was being run rather than basically handing trains off from one station to the next. And it improved things to such an extent that some marginally double track lines could get rid of the second track and run even more traffic. Going to branch off and steal things from another talk I do. Railroad equipment has a definite life cycle. The mainline locomotives last about 20 years. That doesn't mean to say an SD40 sort of falls off at 1990. It is the mainline preferred fast locomotive. It gets replaced by the next generation of locomotives. They're still around. There's a whole bunch of SD40s still working, but they're not the prime power. Switching locomotives have an average life of about 50 years. Well, they're not working as hard as a mainline locomotive. Freight cars actually have to retire at 40 years unless they're totally rebuilt. Containers and trailers last about 10 years. Now, when the railroads started carrying trailers, they were 35 feet long. Very shortly, they got to be 40, then 45, then 48, then 53. But they're going to cycle through pretty quickly, and the railroad had to keep up by changing the capacity. If a freight car that was designed to carry two 35-foot trailers can't carry two 40-foot trailers, so you had to sort of rework the whole equation. Fortunately, since the 1990s, they haven't grown anymore. And then equipment gets overhauled at certain times and gets repainted, if it's lucky, every 20 years.
They get repainted a lot more by graffiti artists now.
Yes, nobody needs to bother with the lower 10 feet of the car, do they?
Right.
Yes. So long as they would stop hitting the reporting marks.
Yeah.
Now, in some of the research I've done over the years, I came up with this theory in this other talk of basically a steam locomotive added an axle every decade.
Huh.
So in the 1890s, a passenger engine was, say, a 440, and a freight engine was a 260. And if you add an axle every decade, you come up to the 1930s, which
Uh-huh.
is the biggest of the steam power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I never really thought about that before. Huh.
Nobody's argued with us.
Yeah, no, I mean, but what you're presenting here makes sense, and you're showing it in numbers that make sense. I mean, I'm sure there must be an outlier here or there where you had a 5-axle built in 1899 or 1901 or something like that. But
well, I'm talking the general use of, like, 280s existed in the 1860s, so
Yeah.
it's not as if, but it was the primary freight locomotive in the 1900s.
Sure, no, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And diesel,
it goes on.
This upload has moved a few sort of tabs around. So anyway, 1930s, streamlined diesels running passenger trains plus switches, and then you got road freight cab units in the 40s, and then the road switcher came along, and then the horsepower race in the 60s. At the beginning of 1960, the highest horsepower locomotive was about 2,000 horses. By the end, it was 3,600. That's a lot to happen in just a short time. And then the fuel crunch of the early 1970s, there's this, enough of this nonsense, we're sticking to 3,000 horsepower engines. And so with the opening up of the coal business out of Wyoming, most of the railroads serving that area used just 3,000 horsepower locomotives of those very designs. Then you got AC traction. And again, you get all these different types of locomotives. And in the 2010s, you got the gen sets, and the emissions gets up to where it is today. There was a time when the class run railroad just did $1 million a year. That was fairly easy to do. And up to 330 railroads at one time were classified as class 1. Well, they changed the classification criteria. And of course, you have all these mergers over the years. So today we have a whole 7 railroads as the major players in the railroad system of both Canada and the United States. We're up to 1940. How are we doing for time, sir?
I think we're all right. It's only 20 past the hour, so we're moving right along.
Okay. Streamlined passenger trains. There were some that operated before the World War II came along, and they were doing very nicely, thank you. All that kind of construction stopped during World War II. It was a much better idea to build tanks and B-17s. But after the war, they really got going. Like, the passenger car builders suddenly had orders for 3,000 cars, which it took several years to build all those things. But they did have increasing competition from the highway and the airplane. So they came up with these ideas of dome cars and also themed coffee shops. And the most spectacular of the 3 themed coffee shops I thought of was the Great Northern Ranch car. It simulated a bunkhouse on a ranch.
Yeah.
And it had a brand called the G-Bar N, and the G-Bar N brand was registered with the Montana Cattlemen's Association.
Huh.
You got to say?
They actually have one of these Great Northern Ranch cars that's being restored at Niles Canyon Railway. We were talking about earlier.
There's another one in Oregon.
Uh-huh.
And I think there were 6 cars in the original train. I think there's about 3 of them still exist in a fairly well preserved condition. So they're quite fascinating beasties. Another was the Northern Pacific Traveler's Rest car, and that same railway in Oregon has both a Traveler's Rest and a ranch car.
Huh.
And of course, the 40s onwards, diesels took over. The War Production Board decided who got what at that point, and even what got constructed. And one of the things was that they allowed EMD to continue building the FT for places where the water was bad. And one of the places the water was bad was the deserts that people like the Santa Fe and the Southern Pacific and Union Pacific went across. And even though, say, the Great Northern had ordered some locomotives, they were allocated by the War Production Board to the Santa Fe because they needed them, whereas the Great Northern could get by with the steam engines. And so all of these things, and EMD got such a performance review for how these locomotives were performing. They stole a march on Alco and everybody else who was in the diesel business after the war. Alco and Baldwin were building switch locomotives, which they were allowed to do, plus equipment for the military. And so Fairbanks Morse came on board, and Lima, both with diesels after World War II. Trailer train was started by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1955. And the object of the exercise was to start a pool of equipment that could be used by anybody at any time. And so the railroads cottoned onto this idea, and it became owned by the major railroads. And at one time, there was something like 38 railroads owned trailer train. I think there's about 9 today. And they started off with the trailer business, as you see at the bottom right. And then the piggyback type work, yep. And then the auto wreck came along. So they got to that business. And then they got into the double stack business, so with containers. And so trailer train actually has a fleet that's twice the size of any of the owning railroads. I do another talk about trailer train. So it's been a very big success story. So don't think that they're competing with the railroads. The railroads own it, and it's a pretty decent asset.
Well, you did a really interesting presentation, as I recall, about the whole TTX, the unknown giant, or what was it called? That the PCR.
Yeah, that's the one I did for you with the virtual convention at PCR. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very interesting topic. Maybe we'll have you on sometime to talk about that. But please proceed, sir.
I've got to make sure somebody in Oregon is not listening. Anyway. Baldwin, Lima, Hamilton exited the locomotive business in 1956. They didn't go broke. They just recognized that the railroad wasn't the place to be. They went on to be very successful in the construction business. But their most popular diesel they ever had was the VO1000, like you see there. Somebody once said that the perfect switcher was an EMD prime mover with a with the Westinghouse Electrics or General Electric electrics. And so you'd have the best of the whole game if you had one brand's prime mover and another brand's electrics. So Westinghouse did all the Baldwin electrics, and General Electric did all the Alco electrics. EMD's electrics were not quite as good as either of these, but that's serviceable. Mechanical refrigerator cars. A lot of the refrigerated business went to trucks in the 40s and 50s. And so to get some of this back, they came up with a mechanical refrigerator. So you got rid of all of the icing stages and all that time-consuming stuff. And these things proved to be quite successful and captured quite a lot of the business back. Not all of it by any means. And in 1958, they'd dieselized the whole railroad system, and the builders decided to come up with a second generation of power, which is basically more horses. EMD came out with the SD24. GE came into the home market with the U25B, and Elco came up with the C424. And this was the horsepower race start. Some of these early models didn't sell very well because the railroads hadn't worn out what they'd bought just 10 years earlier. So it wasn't until, say, the mid-60s that they started buying in volume again to replace stuff they'd bought in the 40s.
Yeah, that makes sense because railroads tend to run stuff into the ground, right? And But having something new when you have something that works, it doesn't make a whole lot of monetary sense. So I've often wondered, though, and maybe you have an opinion about this, Paul, that it seems like EMD and GE EMD and GE seem to have very comparable locomotives at very similar times. And I often wondered which one of them was copying the other. You know what I mean? And I guess Alco did too, to some degree, but EMD and GE, especially getting into the time that you're about to be talking about, maybe you'll cover this. So I guess I'll just shut up.
The big thing that both EMD and GE, who had never built steam locomotives, had over both the major steam players, which was Alco and Baldwin, and Alignment to an extent, was that they were part of a very large corporation which could self-fund and also provide financing for people buying stuff.
Oh, I see.
And
so they didn't just sell the equipment, they financed it too, yeah.
Yeah, so you go to GM and says, I'd like, 20 GP9s. And by the way, would you like some financing with that? So they get both ends of the game.
Yeah.
Alco and Baldwin didn't have that kind of extra, financial muscle.
Yeah.
And so that's what really did them in the end.
That's a huge difference. Yeah.
Yes. Something called money, I believe.
Yeah.
One of the big things about the 1960s to 1980 was all these large mergers coming together. Now, they were big things at the time. We were around in those days, so we saw this happening. Today, they call this era transition mergers because they led to the next merger event, which we come to later. But at the time, merging something, the Erie and the DL&W, yes, but they kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you might remember when Union Pacific gobbled up several large railroads within a few years. 1960s era was really the bottom of the railroad business. They were hurting. And it was all to do with the regulations that were on top of them. Big bad railroad is the railroad made farming in the Midwest possible. And then they were accused of being robber barons when they were transporting the stuff. So, well, all of it's partially true, of course, but they took this regulation business far too far, and you got to the point where the railroads, with declining business, but still had all this regulation, and they were really hurting. It was not a nice time to be around.
Well, I think your fifth bullet point on that last slide there,
That one?
I think the highway carriers and the interstate highway system might have been the largest part of this, right? I mean, because that made trucking a lot more feasible and a lot more affordable. And even to this day, the trucking...
Well, that's because the highway was there. The highway wasn't there in the 20s.
Right. That's what I'm saying. The advent of the interstate highway system in the 50s probably took a huge chunk out of railroading.
And it takes the high value stuff. They're still left with the coal and the grade and the cantaloupes, but they're all the real.
Uh-oh. What happened? Are you muted? Suddenly we can't hear you, Paul. Hold on. Let me see what's going on here. Yeah, I can't. Your voice has gone away, Paul. You can hear me, right? Here, nod your head if you can hear me. Let me bring this up here. Okay. Yeah, so I cannot hear you any longer. I don't know what happened. Your voice went away. If you were to unplug and then replug your headphones in, would that maybe do the trick? Let's try that and see what happens.
Something.
Oh, now you muted yourself. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I've unmuted myself.
I can hear you now. So,
well done. I wonder what happened.
I don't know, but we got you now. We got you back. So let's keep going.
Okay.
Excellent.
So How would you like to be a yard master and know this 100-car freight train is coming towards you? You have no idea what the cars are going to do when they get there. You send a car clerk out with a piece of paper and he's writing down all these reporting marks of what comes in, and then you check that with the way bills. This is all time-consuming stuff.
Yeah.
So they came up with this idea of the ACI, or Automatic Car Identification Label.
Yeah,
They
we see
park
those
it,
on our
say,
models.
50 miles, 100 miles out. It reads all these barcodes on the sides of the rolling stock. Wonderful idea. And then the yard master has this printout that says, all these cars are coming at you, and match them up to the way bills. And it says, this car is going to Pittsburgh, and this one's going to Memphis, and this one's going to such else. And he knows what to do with the train when it arrives. Well, last year I was at a couple of conventions that somebody talked about that whole thing. That barcode was read from bottom to top.
Uh-huh.
And he spelled out what each line of that thing did. It was quite an interesting talk.
Huh.
However, dirt and other accumulations gradually defeated this whole project, because if you're not getting reliable data from the scanner, you're not,
It could be even it could even be harmful to the guy to have the wrong information, right?
Exactly. So the whole game only lasted a few years, but the labels were never taken off. So again, you've got an era specific. This label would be there from this time to that time. They'll all be gone now because all that rolling stock is now retired. But the next thing to come along was automatic equipment identification. And if you look at the bottom right there, there's a little block on the side of the car, and that is going to squawk every time a thing hits it. Now, most of us have got something that you can wave at a reader, and it will pick up the information, like let you in the gate, let you in the front door, that sort of stuff. Well, I do that with here. So the electronic reader, and you've got this little thing that's sitting beside the track, and it's sitting there saying, is anybody there? Is anybody there? And all of a sudden something comes back and says, ABC 123 and DEF 456. And suddenly you've got this whole list, and then he sits there with that train going, is anybody there? Is anybody there? It's the most boring job in the world.
Yeah. Better to automate, though.
But that whole thing has been so successful, and it's in use today.
So is this the precursor to what we now refer to as RF?
It's an RFID process, yes.
Oh, so it is RF. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bottom right.
Radio frequency. So it sends a message.
Yeah.
It activates the thing, which is a passive gizmo. And basically the signal lights it up and says, oh, I'm me.
Yeah. I think our bridge tolls are done the same way with a little transponder we put up in our windshield in the car, right?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And don't have it active on a rental car when you're going up the East Bay Freeway.
Oh, you get slammed,
about $30 a time. What did
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've heard about those rental car agencies really get you with those tolls.
Yes. When you're a foreigner, you're kind of stuck with it. So anyway, in 1971, Amtrak took over the intercity passenger business from the railroads, and the map on the left shows it as it was a rather skeletal system in 1971, and the map on the right, which is fairly hard to read, is so much bigger, particularly in the east.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And nobody at the time expected Amtrak to last more than a couple of years. Well, it's having its 55th birthday next year, so can't be doing too bad. Double stack container car was developed by the Southern Pacific in 1977. And that business, the problem with containers is a fully loaded container, no matter what size, is 35 tons. Your average freight car will carry something like 70 to 100 tons. So why not put two containers on top of each other and get your closer to the load limit? And that's what really started the double stack business.
Yeah, and it was so good that they even changed the profile of the tunnels to accommodate it.
will add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at the little notch at the top of quite a few western tunnels. And
Yeah.
in the east, the first railroad that could really get to the east coast was the Erie, which was built to 6-foot gauge. So it had the clearance already, and everybody else followed suit. So 1980, so solid bearing freight trucks are banned from interchange from 1980. And here's another time point for your model railroading. You can have a solid bearing freight truck on your railroad, like in maintenance away service or captive service, but you can't give it to another railroad. So the roller bearings had been around since the 60s and had gradually improved the whole freight truck business. In fact, that's what I was just talking about. Okay. Another big thing from 1980 was the Staggers Rail Act. Harlan Staggers introduced a bill to Congress, which effectively deregulated the American railroads. And some thought it would never work. In actual fact, it was a startling success. And the railroads got to price their own business properly. They were even doing so well at it that they could discount things so more traffic was costing less, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the great success stories of railroading was the Staggers Act. And then in 1984, the end of train device replaced the goose. And I never realized until I did research for this that there were 3 different styles of EOT. One is dumb, one is average, and another one's smart. So the smartest one can actually apply brakes at the rear end of the train.
Oh, interesting. So that's controlled by a radio, probably from the locomotive, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, and it was a 2-way intelligence. So the average intelligent one is telling the locomotive, this is what's happening, folks. It's like I'm still here and I'm moving, but he's not going to respond to anything coming back. Whereas the smart one is 2-way communication. So the engineer can apply the brakes and then tell the back end, hey, apply brakes.
So the EOTs are really a lot like people, aren't they?
In what regard?
Dumb ones, average, and smart.
True. We won't ask any percentages here.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to identify as any of them.
What also happened in the 1980s was and onwards was the largest mergers of what we've got today. And so BN merged with Frisco, and then the Santa Fe, the UP took over all those railroads there, some successfully. Like when they took over the SP, they said, oh, we can work Houston better than that. Well, SP was already doing it as well as they could, so they messed it up, if you remember that exercise.
Yeah, one of my favorites was the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe merger that never happened, but they did manage to paint some locomotives with this nice SPSF logo on the side, which later became known as Shouldn't Paint So Fast.
And the color scheme was known as the Kodachrome because it was the same color as a Kodak box.
Yep.
Whereas in the last 20 years, so the Acela came along in December 2000. That train, if Amtrak ran nothing else, would be a profitable railroad.
Oh.
That's how much business it does.
Hmm.
And then the Northeast Regionals, which I've been on a few times, that's a nice operation.
Sure.
Most of us outside that part of the country don't realize how much business is going on, and that, stand on a platform on the Northeast Corridor and you'll see how much goes by. And it's not just Amtrak. You've got the regional railroads in the various areas, NJ Transit and Scepter and
Isn't Mark one of them? The Metropolitan, what is it?
Maryland area, MA, Rail Commuter, I think. Yeah, I think, yes. Yes, it's one of them. I once figured it would be fun to travel by commuter train all the way from Washington to Boston. But there's 2 gaps. You got to use Amtrak.
Oh.
Yeah, south of Scepter and north of New Haven. Yes, I think. Another thing that happened was precision scheduled railroading. I hardly mentioned individual people in this whole game, but E. Hunter Harrison
And look here.
was the real provocateur for precision scheduled railroading. It has benefits in that crews know when they're going to work and they can predict their day, which they can't with on-demand trains. But there are also disadvantages, so it's a controversial.
Yeah, we'll talk to any railroader for a class 1 and ask them how good PSR is, and you'll get an earful.
Yeah. And then the genset locomotive. So the very first one was that one on the right there, the UPY 2005. And the object of the exercise was if we only need one small engine to do a particular thing, why do we need to carry around one large engine that's consuming a lot more fuel? Great idea and a lot less emissions, but they're high maintenance. The one on the top left actually has 3 gensets in it. So it's a lot of different moving parts as against one clunking 20-cylinder or 16-cylinder prime mover. So they tend to get used in places where you're going to get bad air, like Los Angeles, like Pittsburgh, like Houston, but they don't operate everywhere. Emission standards have gone from tier 1 to tier 4 over about the last 40 years. And each time they say your new locomotives have to be, same with trucks. And I think it's reached about the end of the game.
Yeah.
Brightline is turning out to be quite the success story. It started up in Florida in 2018, and it now runs all the way to Orlando from Miami, and it's being built through to Tampa. These same people, Fortress, are also involved with one of the high-speed operations that they're talking about going to Las Vegas from the LA area, so they could be a game to watch. And Amtrak is going into the next generation of diesel locomotives, mostly with Siemens, and Siemens is having a fairly good game with the passenger cars as well, with the venture cars. And the next generation of Acela is just starting service now after a lot of controversy. And that, I think, is that.
Hey, and look, the title's still outside the box.
Yes. Anyway, so how long did that take?
Look at that. You did good.
That was great.
Or you did well, I should say. Pardon my terrible English.
Good works.
Yeah.
We murder English just as well as you do. So.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So people are asking if you have your own layout.
No.
Oh, no.
I have been involved with large club layout here. I was involved with friends' large double car garage layout over the years. Right now I'm involved with very little, so locally. And,
sure.
And I do more historical research than I do model railroading anymore. So,
and I can say with great confidence that it really shows, because that presentation probably had more information than most people watching had any clue about. So I'm really intrigued by the fact of how far away you are, but I guess you can be thousands of miles away and still read books, right? So
we're quite good. We actually learn English here.
Right. probably speak more proper English than we do. We speak American English.
I found the presentation really interesting at Silicon Valley Lines. We go every other month is either modern or transitional, with the separation time being the day of creation of Amtrak.
Oh.
And so we have one or two people in the club that'll actually go, that doesn't belong on this operating session because that's to the other side of the line.
Yes.
That sort of thing. It's also true that we do try to keep the cars on the correct side of the line as well, with things like walkways and whether they have cabooses and that kind of stuff.
And even if you look at the start of Amtrak, the Rainbow era was a fantastic time to try and model.
Well, and honestly, with such a large time for modern, I really appreciated the part where you talk about basically the 70s and 80s for railroading were kind of the doldrums in many ways. And you
Yes.
saw a lot of railroads kind of scrambling to put together motive power lash-ups. At that time in my life, I was up in North Dakota in Grand Forks. And I found it remarkable. It's like I found an engine string with like a Jeep 38, an F7, and maybe an SD40 or something like that, all strung up together. And I was like,
Exactly.
Yeah, you get your power
And-
wherever you can.
yeah,
right?
And it was really sad to watch both the Rock Island and the Milwaukee fade away. And, those were very proud railroads in their day.
right. And so, in a way, seeing what's happening nowadays with the UP and BNSF and all that kind of stuff, people decry the fact that we've lost so many railroads. But the best thing about it is that the railroads are doing well. They're very healthy right now.
Yes.
And I'd much rather that than what I saw in the 70s and 80s, where you
Me too.
really sat
Yes.
there going, is this going to survive?
And another thing about today is it seems like it's so effortless. I have been beside the track where you've got a stopped container train on a grade, and there's something like 16,000 whatever horsepower somewhere over there. And
Yeah.
this thing starts uphill. You hardly hear the thing accelerate. And this rolling stock within about 5 minutes is whipping past you at a great rate of knots. That is real technology at work. And while I wouldn't want to model this era, it's rather fun to stand there and admire it.
The problem with modeling this era is trying to make any sense of, kind of a switching layout or something like that. There's not a lot of opportunity for that I've seen. So I kind of fudge it, and I proto freelance, and I'm still switching cars.
There's a question in the chat there. I was wondering what sparked Paul's interest in American railroads. Well, if you looked at a model railroad or a guy trying to get into model trains in, say, 1960 when I started here, now we're a British country. My first train set was a Hornby 002 rail set. And I enjoyed it. Then I joined a club the next year, 1961, and suddenly discovered American stuff.
Mm.
It wasn't the prototype that drew me to America. It was standards. I could buy an F-third this and a roundhouse that and an Atlas something else and put it on whatever track I wanted, and it all worked. British, you were either in the Hornby Club or the Triangle Club or the something or other else club because they were all incompatible.
Oh, so standards.
So from the model, you got interested in the prototype. Then when you join the airline business in 1970 and start hitchhiking,
That actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that would be why you're such a great NMRA member, right? Because that's where the standards came from.
This has been the greatest club I've ever been a part of.
Right.
I became a life member in 1972. Nixon had taken the US off the gold standard. We got the best exchange rate from New Zealand dollars to American dollar that I've ever seen. So the $100 American was $72 New Zealand. Don't ask me what I'd have to do today. And it's been the best bargain ever. And look at the people I've met, the fun I've had, the opportunities. I don't know what sort of things I could have done if it wasn't for the NMRA.
Yeah.
I met friends all over the world through it.
Yeah, that's a real success story for them. I think that we should capture this and put it in a bottle and pull that out every time someone gets upset with, what has the NMRA done for me lately?
It allows you to participate. That's what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not going to do anything for you. It gives you an opportunity if you want to fly.
Yeah, to do things for yourself, right?
And I've had a great time.
So Dave's wondering if you're going to go to the national convention in July.
Well, I'm giving 2 talks at it. I better be there.
That's a good idea. Yeah. It's something I want to mention. A couple things. First off, for people watching and participating in the chat here, if you do have questions, this is the time to get them in because we only have 10 minutes before we go. But I want to mention I saw at our Bay Area Layout Design and Operations Weekend about 3 years ago. There's a guy that you probably know named Mark Amfar, and he does a really interesting presentation on yards and how the yards or the work in the rail yards changed over the eras, and explains why the traffic was different and what they were doing, what they did in this era, what they did in this era, and what they're doing now. And it is absolutely fascinating to hear and come to an understanding of how things worked. And I think it gives you it gives me a better appreciation for transportation logistics and that kind of stuff. Because it's, if you talk about, let's talk about transportation logistics, most people would rather shoot themselves, But if
it is an amazing topic when you get into it.
It is. It's very interesting.
And that's what prototype research has done for me. I've learned so much about it. And when I first started doing research, somebody says, follow the money.
Yeah, right?
Have you ever heard of an AFE?
I can't repeat what I would think it says, what that means.
Authority for expenditure.
Okay.
It allows you to spend capital money. It's a railroad-wide, like it's industry-wide thing. It only becomes a railroad document when you put, my railroad on the top.
Right.
The rest is a standard, everybody knows it document. And when you start going into the files and seeing what this does, and you don't raise an AFE out of nothing. Somebody has put forward an argument, let me buy this. Or we wrecked this freight car, we need to write it off, and so you get the story of how that happened. Interstate Commerce Commission accident reports, fascinating stuff. I mean, it's a sad situation, but the amount you learn from them is just amazing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of prototype out there to find.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being someone who enjoys research as much as you seem to, you probably found all the tricks. So.
A few of them.
Yeah. I mean, stuff has to be documented. And whenever something's documented, that gives you a trail to follow to figure out what was going on. So it's all interesting.
Well, I would hate to be researching today 50 years from now.
Okay. Why is that?
The stuff that I'm digging into, like, do you know anybody who'd be silly enough to fly from a barbecue at his brother's place on Christmas afternoon, gets on a jet and goes from Auckland to Los Angeles to Chicago to the Twin Cities and spend 9 days with snow on the ground and great coats and heavy gloves going to the Minnesota History Center every day, and then come home again? I did that 2 years in a row.
Yeah, I was going to say, something tells me I know someone who did that.
And basically, I found the information, got them to photocopy it and sent it home. I wasn't waiting for the paper. I was just finding the stuff. And I was dealing with files nobody had touched in 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, those paper files don't exist for the modern railroad. They're all inside these electronic bubbles.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you'd have to have access to the railroad's data, which no one will have access to that because it's private. Yeah, I guess I see what you're saying.
I was at the Minnesota History Center with a friend who lives north of Minneapolis, and he wanted to find some stuff, and I was just standing around. And it was about 3 of us, and I says, I'd love to see the stacks. And one of the docents overheard me. He says, would you really like to go do that? So we did. And you get down to this cavernous basement, like the whole thing is about 50 foot high. And you got these dirty great racks where you need a forklift truck to get stuff down. And this is where everything was. Over here is the Archdiocese of St. Paul. And here is the GN stuff. And here's the Northern Pacific stuff. And,
did they have those giant books, the ledgers with pages this big this big that you have to...
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's amazing stuff in there. That is all inside, probably up in the cloud today. So
yeah,
how are you going to get to that?
definitely digital, and I don't think those the companies have to submit records though, like for tax purposes or something that I think you can access.
But the more interesting thing is you'd almost have to have a historian associated with each railroad to archive off things like bridge design and engine quotas, rosters, and all that kind of stuff, because that's kind of the flavor of really what forms each of these eras.
Yes.
And any kind of buildings they make to the side and signal shanties and all of that would, I mean, just look at going from wood ties to cement ties.
Yes.
I mean, and where that's applicable, and I'm guessing there will be a lot more materials changes in the future.
We're just at the start. We think that we're up to date, but well, look at what we're doing right now. Could you have imagined this 20 years ago?
Oh yeah, I mean, the closest thing to this we had 20 years ago was like a BBS or something, right? Or well, I guess AOL was started 20 years ago, 2005.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember when things began anymore, but yeah,
let's say 30 years ago.
Yeah,
1995.
30 years ago, this would have been on UUNet.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
And
sir,
we wouldn't have seen a fraction of the resources that we've played with as well. So
yeah,
that's true too.
yeah. What could we do with ASCII art?
I'm thinking of coming to Road Park next April. So
Oh, well, maybe we'll see you. Cool.
look forward to it.
Well, sir, we've come to the end of our time, so I want to thank you for being here and taking the time all the way from New Zealand. It was I wasn't sure at first, and when I saw how much information was in the presentation when you sent it to me earlier this week, I wasn't even sure we'd get through it, but you did a really good job with the presentation, and I learned a lot. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me.
That. All right,
See
sir.
you guys again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Catch you later.
Take
Thank you.
care, Paul.
Bye.
Okay, folks, and with that, we're at the end of our show. And just a super huge thanks to Paul. I hope you learned a lot too. I would say, based on the comments, that probably people learned as much as they needed to, because there weren't a whole lot of questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really fascinating. And it made me think about some of the things that it happened, but you don't really know why.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
Right.
it's interesting to hear the why behind the what.
And like I say, with SVL being the way it is and with multiple themes, it's always good to have the refresher course of, oh yeah, that happened on this side of the line.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, there's more things that happened on that side of the line that might be actually more interesting to carry on with.
Yep.
Also, I'd like to thank you for coming up here for this run.
Yeah.
Rockland really appreciated it. I was able to let him out, and he was happier, and so that was good.
Rockland's the puppy.
Yes.
The really big 80-pound puppy.
Yes.
Well, I mean, this is an excuse to hang out. So we had a good time, and hopefully everybody had a good time on the stream. A couple things. Just a reminder, Memorial Day weekend coming up. Check your local events, because if you're in the Bay Area, we have Rail Fair, O-Scale West, and then just down the coast a short distance, 2.5 hours, we have Best of the West down in Santa Margarita Ranch. That's a really cool event with all kinds of vintage steam tractors and military equipment and tanks, and they have a 3-foot narrow gauge train that runs around there with the original Santa Fe and Disneyland rail passenger cars. It's a really cool event down there. There was something else I thought that was worth mentioning, which is that our friend Heath is going to be starting his live stream, I'm pretty sure, here in about a minute. So if you can go over to Humanity Junction, that's human with a C in brackets, ITY Junction. I'm pretty sure he does a live stream every week. Oh, there's Heath right there. Heath, are you doing a live stream tonight? He says, what is Heath? Oh, who is Heath? I thought he said what? I was going to say, who is Heath? What is Heath? Heath, are you doing a live stream?
Why
here
is Heath?
Yeah, why is Heath? Where is Heath? What the hell is Heath? And he's not answering if he's doing a live stream.
He's probably started it.
It already started. Okay, so we're gonna dip out here, and we'll catch everybody next month on Talking Trains, where we're gonna be talking to I don't remember now. Well, look for it on the channel.
We'll
talk
get back
about
to it.
See everybody later. Thanks again for being here.
See you guys later. Play the music, John.
Here comes the music.